Hi, I'm Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Corinne.
Hi, I'm Danielle.
Hi, I'm Kelly.
Hi, I'm Amber, and we are Inclusion as One, making space for everyone
Together.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Inclusion as One with myself, Amber, Corinne, Danielle, and Kelly. We are missing Charlotte lots this week, but she has got some big girl stuff happening, lots of big plans that we can't reveal just yet, but watch this. So we're going to be talking today actually about, we've completely sort of changed what we were going to talk about, and we're actually talking about something that's kind of come in the last sort of 24 hours, where a lot of people are quite scared at the minute about SEN education and EHCPs in particular. I'm going to leave it to Danielle to explain because she is the most articulate babe in here. Who can explain it properly. Take it away, Dan. What's going on?
So at the moment, there are talks of changes to the Children and Families Act specifically. So there's a lot of talk that EHCPs are going to be completely revoked and just removed. It can't happen. It's not just as simple as that. We know newspapers like to sensationalise things. They will pick at headlines, and the headline that all EHCPs are going to be stopped, this could happen, this will happen, makes for a great headline. But the reality of it is so much different. The law will always supersede everything. This is why, stripping it back to basics, when you go for an education healthcare needs assessment and you're turned down, or you apply for an EHCP and you have to go to a tribunal for sections B, F and I, or a combination, very often local authorities will lose at court because they applied their local policies, their local framework, but that will never ever supersede the law and legislation. So the Children and Families Act of 2014 details all of the legislation around special educational needs and disabilities in education as well. And that's what is relied upon at tribunals to get our children the help they need. So by saying we're going to take away EHCPs, they can't just do that. It has to be passed through government that the law would be changed. You cannot take away something that is part of the law without a lengthy process. It goes between the two houses. So you've got the Houses of Commons and the House of Lords in government. So what normally happens with any changes in law, and this is what's happened with this, is there's discussions between MPs, local councillors about the money and the costs of everything. With that, talk's been happening. They want to look at reducing the SEND deficit. So they are saying that potentially a way to do that would be to remove EHCPs. Before it will go any further, there has to be a lot that happens to be able to pass that. At the moment, I think it's even more confusing because we've got the National SEN Inquiry happening. The National SEN Inquiry is completely separate. It does highlight a lot of these issues, and of course, talks around is there still a need for EHCPs, and all of that will be part of the National Inquiry. But the National Inquiry is kind of sitting over here, the changes in legislation's over here. So for any law to be changed, it will be batted back and forth. They call it political ping pong for a reason. It will go between the House of Lords, which the House you don't see on TV. They're not the ones with the MPs in it. And it will go between them and the House of Commons, back to the House of Lords. And it's a really lengthy process. Before anything is looked at, a bill is introduced, and that bill will explain why they want to do it, what they want to do, what's the purpose of it. The House of Lords then vote on it, basically. And if they agree with what the proposals are, and this is the same for any law that's amended or revoked, it then goes back to the House of Commons, they vote on it, and it goes back and forth several times. And then obviously further down the line, you'll get public consultations, parent consultations, specifically for SEND and education healthcare plans. IPSI will be involved. The National Association of Teachers Union will be involved, because it doesn't just affect SEND children. And that's another thing that's been lost in all of this scaremongering and fearmongering. It affects every child and every child's education. It affects all schools as well, primary, secondary. It affects all types of schools. Even if in many, many months, years, there is no set time frame on it, but it takes such a long time because it will be batted back and forth. Even after all that time, if let's say the House of Lords said, yes, we're going to amend this and we're not going to give EHCPs, which I really don't think will happen. It will get squashed before it gets to that. But even if we said very worst case scenario that happened and the House of Commons voted and said, yes, we're all in agreement. Of course, you'd have a lot of people lobby it, but let's just say they got their way. It would then have to go to the monarchy. It would have to go before the king, and the king has to agree to it. And it is only after it has to go for royal approval. It's only once it's gone through all of those stages would it then come in. Now, they did look several years ago, it was, I think, around 2017, 2018. I could be wrong on the dates, but I know it was kind of a lot before COVID. The central government did look at changing the SEN Code of Practice, the SEN policy, and the Children and Families Act specifically about SEND. And they were looking at the green paper and the white paper. And that got thrown out. There was a big hype about it, big scaremongering about it. And we never heard anything more because it started to get through those very early infancy stages. And everyone was saying, from teachers, from politicians, from people, from organisations that support and help and know what the implications are, such as like the National Autistic Trust, IPSI, people like that. I don't know who was involved in those specifically at the moment, but it would be those sort of people. They said how catastrophic it was. And it got shelved, it got tabled because they were like, it's not going to happen. We can't predict what's going to happen in the future. It could happen one day. It's unlikely to. Personally, I don't think it will happen. And if there was a change, it would be replaced for something else. There used to be statements. You didn't used to have EHCPs.
I had a
Children
statement.
the statements were phased out. That was taken away. If you want to use a native language, it was taken away. But it was replaced with EHCPs. So it wasn't like statements were removed and that was it. Children just had to fend for themselves in mainstream with no help. So there will always have to be something, because our children are highly protected, not just SEND children, but all children under the Children and Families Act. And then it's not just the Children and Families Act. You've got the Education Act of 1996 that protects children. You've got the Equality Act of 2010 that protects children. And then you've got like the SEN Code of Practice and the SEN policy. Although that's not legislation, it is a central government framework. There's so many steps to it. And I just think it's something to be aware of. It's something to be wary of in terms of, okay, they're starting to look at changing things. So we need to just be mindful of that and just keep an eye out, but don't spiral, because at the moment there's a lot of people, and especially nowadays with social media presence, things go around so quickly. So many articles are written by so many different outlets. Of course we have, like anyone with a child or a younger person in education has got to be mindful, but it's about having it in the back of your mind and being like, okay, it has to go to public consultation. There are so many steps involved. I would say be mindful of it, be aware of it, but I wouldn't be concerned at this point at all.
I think a lot of people are scared as well. Just while you were talking, I was just trying to look up the legislation. Obviously in Wales, they did do something like this, didn't they? But it's because they have a different set of laws. So they don't have the Children's and Family Act. They've got the Social Services and Wellbeing Act in 2014. And some parts of the Children Act 1989 apply in Wales. That new act has replaced significant portions. And then you've got the Children and Families Measure in 2010. And that more comes under like child poverty, play opportunities and childcare. And then SEND children are now referred to as additional learning needs. In Wales is the Additional Learning Needs and Educational Tribunal Act 2018. Now they have individual development plans rather than an EHCP.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. Wales and Scotland work off of, so people
Different
assume the UK works the same, and this is another thing. It is different frameworks. So although we are the UK,
England
works differently to Scotland and to Wales. And it's not just with education, it's not just with SEND. This is why you have NHS England, NHS Scotland, so they work differently. So I am not au fait with the systems in Scotland or Wales. I haven't looked into them, so I'm only kind of au fait with how England works. But you've also got to look at comparisons as well. So yes, things have changed in Wales. They are a lot smaller than England. That's not to say what's happened in Wales is
Can't happen,
acceptable. But at the time some of these changes come in, from what my understanding is, and I could be wrong, really any kind of political makeup over there. That I don't think they had anybody in government as such. And this is the thing. So you've got, although it will go between the House of Lords and the House of Commons, legislation that's kind of passed, voted on, amended, revoked, it will be done for each area. So it would be, okay, we're doing this for England, or this will only affect Scotland, or only affect Scotland and Wales. So, and if you don't have the constitution there, so people hear constitution, they normally think of America, but we do have a constitution in the United Kingdom, and that's our government. It looks different to what it does over in America, but it's still a constitution. We still have constitutional rights. So if you don't have anybody representing you as a nation, it's really hard, because you've got nobody to kind of push back on these things or ask the questions. And I think what happened in Wales was awful, to say
Well,
the least.
it was
It really
illegal,
was.
wasn't it? It actually, it's a huge criminal, like, it's an injustice. It shouldn't have happened.
It is.
And it actually broke several laws in terms of how they're meant to be doing it, like the policies and procedures and stuff. And yeah, it just sounds like that's how that got through, like, because they were able to kind of handedly do it.
Yeah.
I think that's really important to be mindful of as well, isn't it? Like when these narratives come out in the media that are maybe a bit misleading or a bit misinforming or very gaslighting for people that are already at capacity with no concrete information. You know, parents of children with SEND, grey areas are not ideal, because we're already working at capacity. We've already got lots of things to worry about, and we don't need threat on the plate as well. But I think it's really important to, yes, be mindful that, you know, it could, would, maybe, might happen, but also be mindful that it does sometimes benefit local authorities to have gaslighting things in the media, because what it does is it causes smoke and mirrors, because everyone's looking that way. We need to take a step back and look at what they're doing overall, because they cause a fuss in one area while they're very deliberately doing something else right under your nose. And we know, unfortunately, that that's how they play. So I think a really good way that I do it is I'm just on my guard. I'm not spiraling. I'm not anxious, but I am mindful that they don't play fair. And I just look at the picture overall. And until someone comes to me and says, this is definitely going to affect your child, and gives me some direct guidance on that and some definites, I'm not going to emotionally lead anywhere and start putting things out into the internet that might affect other people if it's not based on fact. Because I think it's really easy to run away with those emotions and get really wound up and start messaging other people. And we've all got responsibilities as fellow parents, and you don't know what someone else is dealing with. You might drop them a message in their inbox, and that might be the absolute last straw. They could be making decisions about whether or not their kids even stay in school based on what's going on. And I think you can help people not cope.
Yeah.
So I think it's about, you know, just sharing what you actually know. We all live with enough unknowns. We don't know if our kids are going to meet our targets. We don't know if the medication's going to be there on time. We don't know if we're going to be, you know, reviewed when we should, or, you know, whatever it might be. We definitely don't need those woulds, coulds, shoulds about the really big stuff.
Yeah.
Not if there's no, you know, not if there's no context to it. So I think you're right, Daniel. I think we do need to be mindful, because if that conversation has happened and we know what happened in Wales, but also just bring some, you know, morality to it, and just a little bit of actual reframing the likelihood of them, you know. If anything, I think all it will do is just raise the amount of tribunals that are going on and put them under more financial pressure, and take that into consideration, because they're already on their knees.
Well, our authorities spent, what, 75k last year on losing tribunals? £75,000. Like, that could have built, you know, that could have set up a couple of SRPs in a couple of schools. Do you know what I mean? Like, that could have helped 20 kids. Instead, you've spent 75k that's just gone into the ether over what?
It's pound for pound. It costs exactly the same to get to the first tier of the tribunal as it does to have an EHCP. £6,000 for the first bit. So they're throwing that EHCP down the drain for the sake of arguing with a parent.
And then they have to still spend that 6K and whatever, well, like 12 grand or whatever it is they get, if they get band 1 or high needs funding, whatever.
As well
They're
as
spending that amount of money. I think what we need to do is, for me, it's about tangible things that we can actually do. So tangible things that people can do right now. Write to your MP. If you are concerned,
100%.
find out your local MP. I'll try and make a template. And there are lots of templates out there. You can use ChatGPT and whatever. And
I love ChatGPT. Best thing
we
ever.
love a bit of AI here. And, you know, you can write a really good letter to your MP and say, I am concerned about this. What are you doing as my local MP to, you know, ensure that the SEND children of our community are looked after and are given what they need and what they are rightfully entitled to? We can do that. So absolutely, I'd encourage anyone to do that anyway and find out what the policies are for your local MP and what their stance is on SEND education. I think it's worth noting that there is going to be a change. And I think that's one of the things that's going to cause massive amounts of anxiety anyway, because, you know, it is anxiety inducing, any change. And I think, unfortunately, we've got a very new government who are doing some very crazy things at the moment. Like, they're doing, you know, really crazy things and saying crazy things because they're trying to appease to right wing. And a big part of that is, unfortunately, they will look at the most vulnerable demographics, including disabled children, and they'll point the finger and go, it's your fault, we're spending all the money on you.
Yeah.
You know, without looking at the bigger picture, that actually, if children with additional needs, whatever those additional needs are, you know, anchored and given what they need and given the nurturing environments that they need, they will flourish and they will become, hopefully, active members of the community, whatever that looks like. I'm not saying they've got to go and get a job. I'm not saying they've got to go and have relationships. That's not, you know, that's not a capacity for some of these children, but they can still be members of the community and they can still be worthy. And I think, you know, and I like to think that I'm a good example of that, being someone that grew up with what I needed as a child. And I will always advocate for that reason. And yeah, I think that's what we need to kind of focus on. It's actually, if we can get, you know, the structure around the children, whatever that looks like, if they change the name of it or whatever, it's got to look the same. Legally, like Dan said, they have to still put those provisions in place. They still have to meet need. They can't just not meet need. So either way, we're, you know, it'll be okay. It's just trying to make sure we do the tangible things. And I think the other tangible thing we can do as parents is keep ourselves educated. Make sure you're really familiar with the laws. It's awful because you don't become a parent to think, oh yeah, I'm glad to know, you know, War and Peace about SEND education, but here we are. And, you know, there are some courses out there you can do. You've got helplines like IPSI who will, you know, happily explain things to you. There are lots of SEND advocates out there who will help you. And, you know, this information is out there. It is accessible, that you can find out about how to actually support your child and what their rights are and what you are entitled to with or without a diagnosis. Because I think sometimes, you know, all these little myths get peddled. You have to apply to a mainstream school before you can get an EHCP or a SEND place. False. I only found that out the other day. Because I believe that myth. Yeah, I believe that myth. I'm supporting a parent at the moment who's got a child transitioning to secondary school, and he's going from mainstream primary to a SEND secondary. You know, I was just checking a couple of things because I've just qualified as a SEND advocate, and my tutor went, no, she doesn't need to put down a mainstream school. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah, that's a myth. I was like, great. So, you know, that's a myth. And, you know, they say, oh, you need to have a diagnosis to get an EHCP. No, you don't.
Yeah.
Based on need. Same with DLA, based on need. You know, you don't need to have a diagnosis to get certain things. And it's not about getting the money and getting certain things. It's just making sure your child has what they need and what they're entitled to thrive. And that's it. That's all it comes down to.
Yeah.
Can I just add in, sorry, I just wanted to
No,
double
go for
check
it.
before I said about it. So if you type into any search engine like the Children and Families Act of 2014.
There's an easy read, isn't there?
Yeah, the first search result will come up. It will be the website where all the laws are on, all legislation's on, but it also covers like the SEND Code of Practice and the SEND policy is www.legislation.gov.uk. When you go onto it, and the law is like legislation and law is always written in a way, it's very archaic. They use words that we don't use nowadays. It's written in Old English. But when you go onto it, it will automatically default to the table of contents. There are explanatory notes as well, and there's an easy read version, which it still gives you exactly what the law is, but it breaks it down, because it is a lot of the law, even like with the Children and Families Act, that's not that old if we think about it. It's 2014. But the way that it's worded in English, the words they use are Old English, and that's how legislation is written. But there is the easy read. It does put it into what I would call more of a layman's terms. So, because it can feel really overwhelming. I know sort of law and policy has always been my strong point. I think that's probably where I've always thrived being autistic. That's the one thing I thrive at, and I love it. I get my teeth into it. But I remember when I first started looking into things, and I was like, it's really complex, because it's not how we talk, it's not how other literature is written, and it can be really daunting. And if I'm very familiar with these sorts of things, you know, with the jobs I've done over time as well, that's helped. But any other parent, I can't imagine how daunting it would be for them. But there is easy reads, and like with IPSI, they break it down. There's a lot of Senidas do as well. There's a lot of trusted organisations out there that you can go on to, and they will literally break down each part of the Children and Families Act, and they will do examples, they will give like case studies. So although it can be very overwhelming, there are ways to simplify it so it doesn't feel kind of all-consuming, and it can feel like you're drowning in it at times.
Really quick.
It will be kicked out.
Sometimes I feel like it's, especially for me, I feel like I have had a lived experience of tribunal and what those emotions are, and the hundreds of pages of evidence, and feeling like you've really got to validate your child's needs to people. But that wasn't about EHCP. I did have an issue with the EHCP, and I really advocated for Oscar, and it was fine. But the rest of it does sometimes feel like another language to me. And I think that's because when Oscar transitioned to school, he was part of the early years rollout, where they really concentrated on early years intervention. And he was really happy. He was really, really lucky, because he got an ONA nursery, and then he had his EHCP done in there, and he transferred to a SEN from his Mary Sheridan nursery. And I'm aware that that is a real privilege to have had that journey, and I'm really grateful for that. So I don't always relate to how difficult it is to get an EHCP, and how it might feel to be in the wrong setting and fighting for one. But I do know people that are, but I know how difficult it is to try and hold on to one, because they took Oscar's history out of his, which would have left him in a really vulnerable position, because it would have brought in question why he was even there, because he's transitioning to secondary. So it was their chance to get in and remove all of that. And I noticed, but some of the children that are not in school and any setting without an EHCP, they're the kind of parents, it must feel like a completely different universe. And that is why it is so important, Danielle, that you are sharing. You know, they can go on, they can look at the easy read. You know, as someone who's had to become a bit of an expert of multiple co-occurring conditions with my son, including a really, really complex eating disorder that there is no research on yet, and live that in real time, I would say read is not selfish to only read the bits that apply to you. You don't need to go on and research the whole thing and be a Q&A for everyone else. You have to put your own breathing mask on first. Write a list of questions before you go down the rabbit hole and go online. Write yourself a list of questions and go, right, what are the 3 or 4 things that are really worrying about me? And let's find out some facts. And then when you're starting to feel like, oh no, it's really overwhelming, there's threat again, go back to those facts, because nobody is above the law. The law is the law, and there are a lot of processes to change the law. And I think that, for me, is ultimately the one thing that does, make me feel a little bit more like the ground isn't disappearing, because we do feel like we fight to get what we've got, and then we have to fight to keep it.
Yeah.
And all of these negatives in the media don't help that feeling that the flaw's disappearing. And I think it's actually a really good exercise to write down some things that are the real solids that cannot change without a lot of notification, processes, and use it as a comfort blanket, because nothing's ever going to change overnight. Nothing ever stays the same anyway. Things will evolve and change over time, but certainly nothing will be removed and not replaced, because they would be breaking every single law
The
that
laws.
Send Education stands on. They're not going to do that.
Education as a whole, because it covers all education, doesn't it?
All
Even
children, yeah, for
covers
all
everyone.
children. So I mean, I'm not saying that what people put out is wrong. It's their opinion, but I do think that people do have a duty to make sure that they are not gaslighting other people, that you're not aware of what else is going on.
You're not
And
fear mongering.
absolutely, and making sure that you either are being very clear that you're sharing your own opinion or sharing direct guidance.
Yeah, it needs to be
Because
We
one or the
just had it with the tribunals, actually, because a lot of information came out to say with send tribunals stopping the amount of evidence that is allowed. So that was kind of what was going around, and it's going to be limited to 100 pages, and I can't remember the exact amounts, but it was significant.
It was 100 pages. Yeah.
We had nearly 1,000 for Tommy's by the time his working document was in, and the working document could only be X amount, and the EHCP, like the final draft that goes before the tribunal, could only be.
So this is in
30-something
reference to
pages.
the bundles, isn't it? Just so
Yes,
people
the
aren't
court
aware, this
hearing
is the
bundles.
bundles. Yeah.
But it wasn't. When you actually looked into that, there were limits on certain parts of the tribunal, but if that wasn't against Section BF&I, so.
Yeah. Which is what you go to
Special
tribunal
educational
for.
needs, provisions and placement. It was certain other things. And also what they said was if you needed more, you can apply to the tribunal to get, so I think it was more, I know it wasn't just for Section BFI, it was other things, but they said if you did need extensions for the bundles, contact the tribunal and they would be able to provide an extension of, so if they'd said for that part, we can only accept 100 pages and you needed 150, all you needed to do was contact the tribunal and let them know. But the way it was circulated was, central government are doing this, local governments are doing this to send children, and now the tribunal's taken away because we've got to pick this, and this. And what it is they only want the most salient information, the most up-to-date, the most important. It's not about you picking what's most important, but like when we went to tribunal with Tommy, I sent the most important medical letters for him that was still relevant and the diagnosis letters, but he had been under services since 18 months old. We went to tribunal, he was 5 years old when we went, like when we had our hearing date. So to send every paediatrician letter that I had for Tommy from when it wasn't relevant, it wasn't needed. And that's more what the tribunal was saying. We don't need everything. We need what is important to your appeal. But there's always ways around. It's like, I can only speak for what I've gone through, but you are told when you lodge an appeal that they check to make sure it's valid, you're giving your dates, and then everything has to go through yourself and the local authority. So the tribunal don't get involved anymore. They can't give you advice. They're not able to because of what you're going through. They have to be impartial, from both sides. But the way people make it, seem is like you can't approach them. I had to go to them and say, I've followed the orders. We're this far in. We are not getting anywhere. Kent is not liaising with us. They have breached 3 court orders now, and the tribunal then had to step in. I think sometimes it's very headline sell. Those sort of emotive things, they gained traction very quickly. But when you look into it, because I know when I saw that, and I've been through the tribunal process, I've only been through it once.
It was traumatic.
And I think I've got quite a good understanding, but I saw that on social media and I thought, we're going to have to go. I can fully imagine we're going to have to go to tribunal again for Tommy for secondary. I can't see any other way around it. But I'm sitting there thinking, I know how long his EHCP is. So what am I meant to do? Just take out the sensory and physical part? Because how do I cut that down? And I started catastrophizing, and it's something that I do and I need to work on. But I spiraled very
I
quickly.
think
And I think
everyone does that.
if you've got knowledge and you spiral, if you haven't got that knowledge, because knowledge is power, I can't imagine how families that have just lodged appeals must have felt. And that's why I think what you say, Kelly, is completely true. And it's so important that people remember we all have a duty
Yeah.
to put out the right information. Or if we're not sure, for me, I won't put anything out until I've read, got it completely 100% in my mind and looked at it from all angles. If people don't wish to do that, that's fine. We all do things differently, but make it clear that is your interpretation and your opinion. Don't sell it as a fact, because with the way the world is at the moment and how much pressure we are under
There's
as
so much
families,
uncertainty as well. Yeah.
But
it
also as
whips
well,
up
I
the
wanted to say, don't feel under pressure to have an opinion. It is okay to say, if that is the case, I really support it, but I don't really know enough about it. So I'm not going to
Yeah.
contribute on it and add to how you feel, because I don't, because for me, we went to tribunal and it was all over the top of my head because I was dealing with other stuff at the time. It'd been going on for about 2 years. We had all the evidence. They hid it twice.
Yeah.
That's why we went to the tribunal, and we went to the big one, whatever it is.
Yeah.
the upper
I
tier.
didn't even know when it was. I didn't even know what they didn't, literally from when they confirmed to me. I got a letter to say we can confirm that the tribunal now has your evidence because it had gone missing twice.
Wow.
I didn't hear anything until I opened a letter in the mail to say the tribunal has been and that we won. I didn't get anything. Didn't get a date, didn't get anything, did not get anything. And for me, I let that go because we won. But if we hadn't have won, that would have been a huge injustice because I mean, I did say I didn't want to go, but they didn't even let me know when it was. And the reason why I didn't want to go is not because I didn't want to go. I couldn't go because I'm the main carer of
You were at
my
capacity.
child. Yes, and dealing with other things. But I just think, imagine somebody who is maybe not as well
Formed or
supported as that, and getting the letter to say no and not having a contact and not having the date, so I do think a little bit of light thrown on all of that and some parameters put in about 100 pages and all the rest of it brings that whole thing to the forefront, where people are looking at what they are doing and why will benefit everyone, because it reminds them of what they are supposed to be doing and why, and people will be looking at it to make sure that people do get a fair shot at tribunal and that they are doing what they should do. So it's not always a bad thing when changes happen,
yeah.
because
think
it
some
means that
sort
they
of change
can't
has
go off
to.
and do what they want.
They have to, yeah.
I think the system as it is now is, what's the word for it? It can't carry on. There's a word for it, like it.
Bursting. Yeah,
It's
it's
absolutely
bursting.
bursting.
Yeah.
And I
Crisis,
think
isn't it? Same crisis.
it is a same crisis. And, we can talk about why we think that is. And there's lots of different reasons why people think that's happening. But the fact is, it is happening. Whatever you want to blame it on, whatever reason you think it's happening, the reality is it is happening. And there are children up and down the country that are in the wrong settings. They're in the wrong schools. It doesn't just impact the children with additional needs. It impacts every single child in that classroom, right?
Absolutely.
And you've got a class of 30 of all different abilities, all different, and you have a teacher probably on their own, or with maybe one TA if they're lucky, trying to manage it all. It's impossible. We are losing really good teachers every single day. We're losing good TAs every day. They cannot recruit. It's completely, utterly, there's a word for it on the tip of my tongue, like unattainable. Like they
I was going to
cannot.
say BS.
That's a word for it. No, but do you know what I mean? Like, it's completely unattainable. Like, I cannot maintain what is happening. And, with us, our experience was with tribunal. I found the tribunal really, really helpful. They were very, very kind to me. I did put on my form that, I have my own, I'm autistic and I'm ADHD. And I really struggled with the forms. I remember getting the 35A, the first one you do. And I literally looked at it and I went, I don't know what I'm doing. And I had to ring Ipsy and go, can someone talk me through this form? Because I physically don't know how to fill it out. Turns out they've sent me the wrong one. They'd sent me the 35, not the 35A.
No.
Yeah, I got sent the wrong form. So Ipsy were like, that's the wrong form. We'll send you the correct one. They were disgusted. That's a whole other story. God bless the lovely lady that helped me on the phone. She was wonderful. And then, I had to go through. The EHCP had done the report wrong, but that swung in our favour because when someone pointed out to me, oh, the EHCP report is incorrect, I sent that to the tribunal and just so you know, the EHCP report is actually incorrect. Here's the reasons. And they conceded. So I never had to go to tribunal, which was quite nice. And, now we've gone from... Yeah, they conceded. So that can happen as well. So if you're getting evidence as you're building your bundle, if you get your evidence, you can just keep submitting that to the tribe. Just keep submitting it, you know. And in the end, I think because we sent it to KCC and obviously the tribunal was CC'd in, if KCC had gone to court, had gone to tribunal date with that EHCP report as it was, they'd have got laughed out. And it would have been a waste of time.
They lose 9 out of 10 anyway at the moment.
They do.
They
It's
lose 9
something
out of every
like
10.
so for every EHCP application, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan. So for every EHCP application, they decline, I think, about 98%.
Yeah.
And then they lose 9 out of 10 times, or 90% out of times they lose the tribunal. And like I say, it was 75k last year. It's probably more now. And
that's
all
not
it is for
including the
me,
ones they concede either, because
Yes.
what they do, that's just the ones we know about.
yeah. So
Because they've gone
if
to
you-
tribunal, but they can concede. They're not, Kent are very well known to concede at the last minute
They
as
did.
well.
They did for us. So with us, actually, no, it swung in. I think I manifested it is the only way. I was clinging onto my crystals. No, so what happened was we sent them the email. It was me and a send advocate, and we sent it over to them. We were like, here's all the mistakes and everything else. And that was, I think, the 6th of June. We got told, oh no, he can have it. And then by July, we had the draft. And then by October, we had the final. So thankfully, he walked into school with a draft EHCP. But before that, we weren't going to get seen until February. And I honestly dread to think what would have happened. And I mean, I don't think he'd be in school. I honestly don't think he'd be at school. He would not be at the setting that he's at now because he's in a mainstream, without the fact that he'd walked in with that draft. If he hadn't have, because, you know, with the draft, they were able to apply for high needs funding. He got his final. It was all agreed. I didn't really have to change a lot. Luckily, the EHCP itself was very good and I didn't have to change a lot. But even with that in place, we still had a really tough start. And I cannot imagine what we would have gone through without that, because you just haven't got a leg to stand on. And there's only so much the school can do physically without anything. Right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And we'll be back next week. And if you want to hit us up, we are on Instagram and TikTok. All the what's the word? All the things are in the show notes. All the links are in the handles are in the show notes. And we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.